We're asking you to simply stay quiet tonight, Chloe. Just let the conversation flow around you. No need to mention your volunteer work. My mother, Eleanor, issued the command as she meticulously placed a hand-painted ceramic turkey centerpiece on the mahogany dining table. It was Thanksgiving, and the atmosphere in their meticulously kept Atlanta home was thick with the scent of sage and the suffocating pressure of familial performance. My father, Robert, stood by the massive marble fireplace, nodding in grim agreement. The hook was set, an explicit order to silence my existence. My name is Chloe Vance, and I'm 31 years old. I've spent the last decade being the family's resident enigma, and more often, their source of awkward pity. I don't have a traditional career. I don't have a title they can brag about. I don't drive a German sedan. While my peers in the family pursued law, finance, and surgery, I earned my degrees in international development and public health, and then promptly disappeared into the world of nonprofit work. My younger sister, Juliet, 28, was, naturally, the golden child. She was a successful corporate lawyer whose engagement ring warranted its own social media announcement, and whose recent purchase of a condo was celebrated with a full-page article in the local society section. Tonight, the entire extended family, aunts, uncles, and cousins who measured success strictly in quarterly profits and square footage, was here to celebrate Juliet's impending partnership track. My background conflict was simple. I chose purpose over profit, and my family, who had paid for my expensive education, never forgave me for the perceived waste of capital. To them, my life was a soft, well-meaning failure. They assumed I lived off ramen, couch-surfed, and held a succession of meaningless, low-paid positions. This perception was carefully maintained by me. For 5 years, I had deliberately kept my professional life private, allowing their judgments to stand uncorrected. The emotional cost of proving myself was higher than the cost of their pity. The current event trigger was the seating arrangement. My mother had placed me at the small card table reserved for the children and the elderly aunt, who had recently lost her memory. Juliet, resplendent in a deep emerald dress, was seated at the head table next to father. "It's just better this way, Chloe," my mother rationalized, smoothing a napkin. "We don't want any disruptive conversations about global poverty when Aunt Carol is discussing her new country club membership, and we definitely don't want to spoil Juliet's big news about her partnership track. You understand, it's about respect for the primary achievers in the family." I understood. I was the disruptive element. The reality was, they needed me to be poor, lost, and quiet, so that their own achievements, Juliet's partnership, father's latest merger, could shine brighter. The family's ego required my professional absence. I moved silently to the smaller table, sitting next to my 7-year-old cousin Toby, who immediately started asking me about the Amazon rainforest, a topic he knew I'd spent 2 years studying. His genuine curiosity was a balm against the icy air of exclusion. The dinner began, and the conversation around the main table was exactly as my mother had planned. A relentless recitation of material success. Juliet was showered with praise for her latest case win. My father held court discussing the essential need for tax breaks for the wealthy, and my cousins boasted about their stock portfolios. Then came the inevitable pivot to me. Aunt Carol, across the room, managed to call out brightly, "And what is darling Chloe up to these days? Still volunteering with, the children?" The laughter was soft, patronizing, and immediate. It was the humiliation scene, the public mocking of my lack of material ambition. My father sighed dramatically. "Chloe is doing lovely work, Carol, very fulfilling. She's currently dedicating her time to a local initiative, providing community outreach. Very low profile." He intentionally omitted any reference to salary or status. "How inspiring," Juliet chimed in, with a saccharine smile that didn't reach her eyes. "But Chloe, darling, you need to think about your future. You can't live off inspiration forever. Have you thought about getting an apartment? Or even a car that runs reliably?" "She's happy, Juliet," my mother interjected, cutting off my response with a dismissive wave. "Let's talk about the summer house renovation. Did you decide on the Italian marble?" The collective dismissal was a deliberate dagger. They wanted me to be small, silent, and poor. They needed to believe they knew the full extent of my life, which they had deemed irrelevant. I had been ordered to stay quiet because I had nothing to show, but they had no idea. The true proof of worth began 5 years ago, 3 months after my graduation. The volunteer work my family referenced wasn't manual labor. It was the foundation of my life's work. I had founded the Vance Global Equity Fund, VGEF, a sophisticated, highly private impact investment charity focused on funding sustainable public health and education initiatives in marginalized communities worldwide. The initial seed money came from a retired venture capitalist who had heard my commencement speech and believed in the power of data-driven philanthropy. My knowledge of data engineering and finance allowed VGEF to operate with a lean efficiency that attracted serious, wealthy donors who valued results over splashy press releases. My local outreach was the establishment of VGEF's U.S. headquarters and a small, highly effective domestic grant-making arm. My little apartment was a strategically rented modest space near the VGEF office, maintaining the facade of low income. My actual financial reality was the opposite. VGEF's endowment, meticulously managed and aggressively grown, now stood at $100 million. As founder and CEO, my personal net worth was substantial, and my professional connections rivaled, if not surpassed, my father's outdated corporate network. The money my father had dismissed, the work my sister had scorned, it was all hidden in plain sight, protected by a simple lack of press releases and a strategic silence maintained primarily for the sake of the family's ego. I looked at my untouched plate, then at my family's smug faces. It was time for the truth. "Actually, Mother, Father," I said, my voice rising just enough to cut cleanly through Juliet's detailed description of her marble selection. "You asked me to stay quiet, but I feel I owe it to you, as my family, to provide a bit of an update on my current professional situation before dessert." The table fell silent. Juliet frowned, annoyed at the interruption. Father glared, recognizing the defiance in my tone. "Chloe, I told you not tonight," my father warned, his tone low and dangerous. "No, Dad, tonight," I insisted, placing my hand flat on the table. "You mentioned I had nothing to show. You worried about my future. You dismissed my passion as mere volunteer work, but that work has grown substantially. So much so that 2 weeks ago, VGEF, the fund I founded, closed on its largest corporate partnership to date." Juliet rolled her eyes. "Oh God, is this another plea for donations, Chloe? We're not getting involved in any more of your causes." I ignored her, focusing on my father. "The partnership is with a multinational pharmaceutical company that needed a highly efficient, data-driven framework for their global distribution of critical medicines. The partnership is valued at over $10 million in initial operational funds, and crucially, it required VGEF to establish a dedicated, permanent endowment to sustain the partnership." My father, a man who understood numbers instantly, looked confused. "A dedicated endowment? Chloe, that requires considerable capital. You don't just establish a $10 million endowment." "You are correct, Father. It requires a commitment of precisely $10 million in guaranteed assets," I confirmed. I reached into the small clutch bag I carried, the only expensive designer item I owned, given to me by my VGEF board, and pulled out a single thick embossed check. It was blank except for the signature line. "This check is my personal contribution," I announced, laying it next to the ceramic turkey centerpiece. "The $10 million for the VGEF Partnership Endowment. I have signed it. The funds are legally clean, fully liquidated, and ready to be transferred to the trust this Monday." The room plunged into profound, suffocating silence. The turning of tables. 20 sets of eyes, seconds ago filled with smug pity, were now wide, with disbelief and shock. Juliet stared at the signature line on the blank check, her jaw slack. My mother's perfectly manicured hand flew to her mouth, covering a silent gasp. My father looked utterly betrayed. $10 million? My father stammered, his voice thin. Where did you get $10 million, Chloe? This is money laundering. You've compromised yourself. It's not money laundering, Father, I said, calmly reaching for my wine glass. It's called profit allocation. VGEF operates a highly efficient investment portfolio on its existing $100 million endowment. That $10 million is the result of 5 years of careful, ethical management and market growth. It is VGEF's money, controlled by VGEF's CEO, which is me. Juliet finally found her voice, shrill with panic. But you drive that old sedan. You don't even wear designers. You told Mom you were struggling. I chose to live below my means, Juliet. I chose to prioritize the endowment's growth over Italian marble and designer clothes. I drove a reliable sedan because the mission required resource conservation. I did not struggle. I chose discipline over display. The distinction apparently is lost on this table. My father slammed his hand on the table, mimicking his earlier gesture. But this time his authority was utterly hollow. You kept this from us. You allowed us to believe you were poor. You deliberately deceived your own family. I didn't deceive you, Father, I stated, rising slowly to my feet. You chose to believe the convenient lie that I was a failure because it protected your ego and inflated Juliet's achievements. You gave me an explicit order to stay quiet because I had nothing to show. I simply complied with your assumptions. My silence was the direct consequence of your judgment. The dinner was ruined. The fallout was immediate, intense, and deeply satisfying. My father, attempting to save face, demanded the details, asking panicked questions about market strategy, the VGEF portfolio, and my board of directors. He was no longer questioning my worth. He was questioning why I hadn't invested his money. The VGEF board is composed of people who believe in ethical accountability and purpose-driven returns, I told him, looking pointedly at his wine glass. I doubt you'd pass the vetting process, Father. And the portfolio is closed to external, non-mission-aligned capital. My mother, recovering her composure, attempted the classic reclamation phase. She rushed to my side, tears welling in her eyes, throwing her arms around me. Oh, my brilliant, brilliant daughter. We knew you would do something amazing. A charity. You're practically Mother Teresa. We need to host a fundraiser immediately. Think of the PR. I gently extricated myself from her embrace. The VGEF charter explicitly forbids press events centered on the founder's personal life, Mother. The mission is the story, not the money. But you're our daughter. This is a family legacy, Juliet shrieked, tears of raw, envious rage finally breaking through her professional veneer. We need to be involved. This is unfair. Unfair? I repeated, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. Unfair was sitting alone on my graduation day because my achievement wasn't considered a milestone that truly mattered. Unfair was being told to stay quiet because my life was a disruptive inconvenience. This, Juliet, is consequence, and the system is closed. I picked up the $10 million check, placed it back in my clutch, and walked away from the table, leaving behind the stunned, humiliated faces of the family who had ordered me to be silent. The long-term consequences were devastatingly specific to their former roles and their established value system. The consequence for Juliet, the golden child. Juliet's life, built entirely on the fragile social currency of her impending partnership and materialistic display, began to crumble. Her firm, learning of the $10 million VGEF endowment and the highly lucrative pharma partnership, began to question why their own lawyers hadn't landed that contract. Worse, a key partner at her firm, a man I had personally vetted for my board and who had rejected the offer, subtly began to question Juliet's social judgment. Juliet's path to partnership was subtly but completely derailed, not because of her legal skills, but because of her family's social toxicity and her own evident, public envy of her sister's genuine, massive success. The moral irony was perfect. Her career was crushed by the silent power of the same network she had dismissed me for lacking. She was left with the Italian marble and the expensive ring, but no future. The consequence for Robert, father, and Eleanor, mother. The family's social standing, which depended on the narrative of the successful lawyer daughter and the unstable charity daughter, was destroyed. When the local media, seeking a human interest angle on the massive VGEF endowment, discovered that the founder's family had intentionally skipped her graduation, the story became a viral case study in parental neglect. My father's financial peers questioned his judgment. After all, if he couldn't recognize and support a $100 million genius in his own dining room, how could he manage their money? He lost significant clients, and their financial stability, the one thing they valued above all else, began to hemorrhage. My mother became a social pariah, constantly asked if she regretted missing the speech that launched $100 million. They were left with their empty titles and a deep, agonizing regret over the choice they had made that Thanksgiving. 2 years later, I stood in a remote village in Senegal, watching a VGEF-funded mobile health clinic administer vaccines. It was the antithesis of the Harrington family's opulent Thanksgiving. My personal life remained disciplined. The $10 million check was a commitment, not a splurge. I continued to drive a reliable car and lived in a simple, anonymous neighborhood. But the moral closure was achieved not through material wealth, but through a final, professional action. VGEF was planning a massive new data center for our global operations. The project required acquiring and renovating a huge commercial property in Atlanta. I instructed my CFO to handle the acquisition with absolute secrecy. The property we purchased was the failing corporate headquarters of my father's former company. My father had been forced to liquidate his failing firm completely, and the bank had quietly put the primary asset, the headquarters building, up for private sale. VGEF purchased the building at a steep discount, not just for the space, but for the location. I hosted a quiet press conference inside the renovated lobby. My mother, who only heard the news through a panicked cousin, showed up unannounced, desperately trying to talk her way past security. I let her in. "Alara, this is spectacular," she whispered, gazing around the sleek, modern lobby, which was now branded with the VGEF logo. "You bought this whole building. Your center. We knew you'd take over Atlanta. You must let your father and I use one of the offices for his consultancy. The prestige. It would solve all his problems." I walked her to a plaque in the new VGF Hall of Founders. On it was etched the mission statement and the names of the core founders and board members. "Look closely, Mother," I said quietly. "My father lost this building due to poor judgment and lack of vision. VGEF acquired it to house its mission, a mission you once told me to stay quiet about." I pointed to a large empty space next to the mission statement. "The only thing your family is contributing to this building is this space. It's reserved for a plaque that will list the names of the administrative positions that the Orion AI rendered redundant at Omnicorp. It's a permanent memorial to the true cost of disruptive efficiency, a concept your family never understood." I turned, my face reflecting a calm, unyielding resolution. "You told me I had nothing to show. Now, my work occupies the place that symbolized your life's entire stability, and the only people who get to speak here are those whose lives are dedicated to the mission." My mother, faced with the absolute, physical reality of my power and her family's irrelevance, finally broke down. She didn't cry for me. She cried for the life she had lost. I had ordered them to be quiet on Thanksgiving. Now, my $10 million silent fund spoke for me, occupying the very seat of power and status they had once denied me. That was the final perfect justice.